Out of all the scenarios of America expanding its territory within the near future, I feel like it's this one that is probably the most probable. Not necessarily likely, but more probable than the other situations. Trump trying to make Canada the 51st state. That's probably the least likely. I don't know. I know that Trump's talked about taking back the Panama Canal. Is this more likely than the Panama Canal? Because we did have the Panama Canal at one point, but that's going to be a tough one. I mean, that's like Panama's whole thing. I feel like taking Greenland is more probable than taking back the Panama Canal. There's a lot of people that would not want us to take the Panama Canal. I mean, that's a massive shipping lane. There's, I think, too many foreign forces that would not want that. Obviously, Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, European. I mean, there's too many. There's everyone. That affects everybody. So I feel like there'd be too much of the world that'd be like, nah. Whereas taking Greenland, there is gonna be a lot of the world that's like, I don't know about this, but much less. So it's the world's biggest island. If you don't consider Australia an island, it all depends on how you classify different continents. It all depends on what happens with. Now, this is an overseas territory that Denmark controls. So this is like going directly up against Denmark. But besides Denmark, I mean, that's really what the negotiations come from. And obviously, Denmark has expressed they're super not down for this. Obviously, but if we were to give them a deal that they couldn't refuse, then maybe that's the only way I can really think about this occurring. If maybe the Americans can somehow position themselves in a way where it's like a national security thing to take Denmark to protect it against Russia. I'm sure that's how they would frame it. That's how they would have to frame it in order to even come to the negotiation table. But obviously Trump tried this back during his first term. I think it was 2018, where he talked about purchasing Greenland. I still want to call it Green Mark. I still make that mistake sometimes. I might make that mistake later in this video. But I mean, Denmark is a small enough nation where maybe there is a way where the Americans can, like I said, give them an offer that they can't refuse. I know they don't want to give Greenland. And what's interesting about this situation, too, is that Greenland territory-wise is 10 times bigger than mainland Denmark in Europe. They also have the Faroe Islands as well. So they have they have two different overseas territories. Obviously, there's a lot of historical connection to Denmark. The Vikings, dating back to the Viking Age and things like that. But, I mean, again, this all goes back to like also a race for the Arctics, a race for the two poles. Obviously, there's a ton of nations that argue over who has Antarctica. I mean, none of it is like official yet, but there's a bunch of like unofficial claims to dividing up Antarctica. We think that land is going to be more and more valuable into the future. Greenland is possibly going to be in a similar situation where we think as we head into the future, as the ice caps begin to melt, who knows what other resources could be underneath it. I think that's what they think. I mean, I think in Trump's world, he just wants to cement his legacy as a president. And, buying Greenland is certainly a way to cement it. Just like every other territorial expansion the U.S. has done in its history, grabbing the Louisiana Purchase, expanding the Manifest Destiny, obviously winning the war against Mexico, and then purchasing states like California and Arizona and Nevada. There's obviously getting Alaska from the Russians and Hawaii. I think so. I think Trump's just on that train, pardon the Trump train sort of metaphor. He's just trying to cement a legacy. So that's why he just wants, you see the meme of him like on his Amazon shopping cart trying to put in his cart the Panama Canal, Canada, and Greenland. Like I said, I think this is much more likely because it only affects 40,000 people, and now the residents of Greenland can kind of use this as a bargaining tool, which they might be right now. Maybe they have no intention of wanting to actually join the U.S., but they can use this to put some level of threat on the Danish government if they feel like the Danes weren't giving them enough attention. Now, I don't know if this is necessarily going to be the best thing for the residents of Greenland because, I mean, look at Puerto Rico. There's plenty of people in Puerto Rico that, want statehood. It's a back and forth, like to frame it like everyone in Puerto Rico. Obviously, Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. To frame it like everyone in Puerto Rico wants to be a U.S. state, that's just not true. Like, it's very divided. There's a lot of business that occurs in Puerto Rico that can only happen in Puerto Rico because it's not officially a U.S. state. There's a lot of people in Puerto Rico that just want to become their own independent nation. It's still very divided. It's not very clear-cut. I know years ago I thought that, everyone in Puerto Rico of course they want to become a U.S. state. No, that's not necessarily the truth. Some people like the limbo. Some people want to go independent. Some people do want to become part of the U.S. So who knows what the residents of Greenland, actually want? I don't know if this is necessarily the best thing for them. There's a possibility. There's not very many people over there. I mean, to assume also that Greenland would automatically be treated better than the way that they're treated right now under Denmark, under the Danish government, I don't know if I'd feel that way either. I mean, again, you could talk to the Puerto Ricans, you could talk to the people, the island of Guam. We still have U.S. overseas territories. We'd really have to dig deeper into that, which again, each one of these places have their own movement to either become independent or to gain statehood. I mean, if any person is going to become, I don't know technically if maybe in order for Trump to actually grab Greenland, it is a situation where he guarantees statehood. That would be interesting. Because that would definitely, and I think he kind of is. Apparently his son, Trump Jr., is, planning on visiting Greenland very, very soon. But maybe that's the only way we do take that and get enough support out of Greenland where we say, okay, instant statehood right now, 51st state. It'd be kind of an interesting situation because, again, there's only 40,000 people that live there. Like, what a drastic difference between Wyoming, which is currently the smallest state in terms of population. They have 500,000 people versus Greenland that's at 38,000 approximately, about there. I'm sorry, no, I'm getting them confused with another nation. They've got 56,000. Still to my point, though, that is a drastic difference than the 50th state, Wyoming, that has about 500,000. I mean, even Puerto Rico has way more of a justification. 3.2 million, that's a solid state right there. That's pretty solid. So it's tough. I always thought that they would figure out a way to do Washington, D.C. as the 51st state, just because they obviously have wanted that for a minute. That's also kind of a difficult one because then you start introducing the idea of having basically cities becoming states at this point. But it's tough. Again, the only way I see this happening is maybe we force Denmark to hold a referendum, but there's no way, and maybe that would happen in 3-4 years. It would take a minute, right? I don't think they could just, first of all, why would they want to do that? You know what I mean? There's no incentive. What if, now one thing is you negotiate, you give Denmark a bunch of money, because let's say just Denmark is just absolutely not willing to sell, even with a ungodly amount of money, if they're just not willing to sell that territory, which makes sense. For them, that makes a ton of sense. Why would they want to give away such an amazing island? We don't know its future potential. Look at the Alaska situation. If you go back to the 1800s, when Russia sold Alaska, that ended up being a massive mistake. Huge, because of all the oil we ended up finding there. I mean, they absolutely would have not wanted to do that if they could, see the future. And the funny thing is they didn't even need to look that far into the future because oil was going to become a bigger and bigger thing relatively recently after they sold us Alaska. So that might be the mindset that Denmark is thinking. Maybe they learned from the mistakes that the Russians made back in the 1800s, the Empire of Russia. So they see Greenland as possibly this future resource-filled thing for the future. Maybe it won't be. Maybe it will. Who knows? And so they're absolutely not willing to sell. Well, what if the U.S. government's like, hey, we'll give you a bunch of money to hold a referendum? Now, that would be interesting because then Denmark thinks we might be able to win a vote, still keep Greenland, and then get a bunch of money with it at the very same time. That might be a deal that they couldn't refuse. The only problem is, then you start running the risk of some foreign election interference. First of all, the Russians would not want us to have Greenland, so they would also be very much on the side of Denmark not wanting them to sell that territory. They would not want the U.S. to hold that stuff. They don't want the U.S. to have even more control over kind of the North Pole, the polar ice cap region right there, which we're kind of shared with Canada and Norway's up over there, and then Russia. Right now, Denmark is a player, but if they sell it, then that's even more stuff that the Russians have to worry about, where the U.S. have air control and more things like that. So they wouldn't want this. Maybe you could convince the Canadians to be on our side for us to, like I said, for a defense region, because then for the Canadians, you got Alaska, U.S.-controlled Alaska, and then U.S.-controlled Greenland, kind of like huddled around your territory. That feels a little bit more safe right there. The Canadians and the Danish people, the Danes, or Greenlanders, have had quite the history, of course, with that rock that they shared, the Whiskey Wars, which they finally pieced out. This was a random barren rock that the Canadians and Danes peacefully invaded back and forth up until the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where they finally decided to make peace. But yeah, it was like a fun little peaceful thing. They left like whiskey there. So they were cool with that. That's obviously a tradition that's no more anymore. So that's not, a little bit less incentive for, I don't even know if that was really enough incentive for the Canadians to really want Denmark to stay up there. But you could argue, I could see a world where the Canadians would want us to take Greenland. But a lot of interesting things. Like I said, I think this is probably the most possible. I don't think it happens overnight. It would happen later into Trump's presidency. But, I mean, dang, what if we just say, hey, we're going to start giving kids Lego toys the U.S. government's going to start purchasing Legos and giving them to every single kid in America. And that would just boost Danish sales, like through the roof. Imagine like Denmark becoming like a South Korea, because they're like geography-wise, they're kind of like actually South Korea and Denmark have a lot of shared, they're very similar in terms of size and in terms of being a peninsula. One just faces up, the other one faces down. But they are only the 38th largest GDP in the world. I think South Korea is 14th. There's a lot of room to expand there, Denmark, if you want to become like South Korea. But anyways, I don't know. I thought it was just kind of a fun topic because people always ask me, and I'm always covering it. And this news seems to have just kind of came out of nowhere again.